Hello everyone and welcome to another video of mine. This is going to be part 2, finally, of my Dendro Archetype analysis. If you haven't watched part 1, feel free to check it out. It's linked in the info box. Disclaimer as always, this is just purely based on my experience and cheats I've done, as well as some other people who I've asked. So if you have a problem with any of the points I make, please create a respectful comment explaining your perspective on the matter instead. Thank you. This will also contain leaks, so here's your warning. Starting with Bloom, let's talk about non-Nilo Bloom teams first. So the reaction at the baseline seems easy to understand, but I will still need to talk about some details that will be important for the entire archetype. So first of all, Bloom happens when Dendro and Hydro react with each other. A part of the aura element is consumed. On a Hydro aura, it's 2 times the Dendro aura, meaning when an enemy has 1 unit of Hydro on them, all that element will be consumed by a singular application of 1 unit Dendro. If Dendro is the aura and Hydro is reacting, then it will consume 0.5 times the amount of units applied with Hydro, meaning 1 unit of Hydro on an enemy with 1 unit of Dendro on them will consume half of the aura and still leave 0.5 units of Dendro. Each reaction will only produce 1 Bloom seed though. So what that effectively means is that it's a lot easier to keep a Dendro aura than it is to keep a Hydro aura while using Bloom reactions. So Hydro units are the way to go when choosing your triggers in Bloom teams, right? Well, there are some exceptions, which I'm going to talk about in the Bloom sections, but since making Dendro units the trigger doesn't bring any inherent advantages, that's mostly how Bloom works. When you don't use Nilo or any Pyro or Electro trigger for the seeds, 4 seeds can exist on field at the same time, but only 2 hits are counted when 2 or more blooms explode at the same time. Also, another inherent problem non-Hyperbloom has is the self-damage. A small portion of the Bloom damage dealt to the enemies is also transferred to the active character, so a healer is highly advised when building this archetype. So to get this out of the way, just using Dendro and Hydro units without Nilo is extremely cope. The AoE is significantly smaller than Burgeon or Bountiful cores, and the damage is also just lower. That's because the reaction multiplier, remember that term from the last video, is 2 and not 3 like it is for Burgeons or Hyperblooms. And well, we are going to discuss this in the Nilo section, but because of the amount of buffing Nilo provides for the blooms, they also can't compete with her teams either, obviously. Now we can't talk about non-Nilo Bloom without talking about Kave, can we? Kave might actually be the worst unit in the entire game. And I say this while he's literally one of my favorite male characters of the entire game. He got power crept by Dahlia, never mind. Yes, I did pray for him to be a Hythem support. I coped with spread on-field Kave and I got depression and benched him eventually. So why is Kave so extremely bad? He fixes one of the main issues non-Nilo Bloom teams have, right? Well, his main gimmick is rupturing Bloom cores to make them immediately explode. It does not, however, make him the trigger of these blooms automatically. He can only rupture these blooms 3 times in the rotation at C0, which is a pathetic amount considering how many blooms the average even non-Nilo Bloom team creates. But he has buffing too, right? Technically he does buff the blooms he ruptures, however it's additive to the EM multiplier, so it's basically completely useless. Reaction buffs might be the worst scaling stats in the entire game, and Hoyoverse did realize this for 2 units actually, and gave them an insane amount of reaction damage bonus to make it up, but one of them is very close to Kave in terms of viability, and the other one is fine, but she also provides so many other things on top of these reactions, but still has her own issues. Kave also has self-sustain built into his kit, but the self-sustain part does not matter when the rest of the team is basically dying anyway. Nahida has extremely low defensive base stats, so even if you switch into her for a very short time, you will just die due to the Bloom damage. So basically you would run a healer with Barbara or Kokomi anyway, and Kave's self-sustain does not matter at that point. If you have Kave C6, he can trigger the cores more often than usual, but even then, his teams literally can't clear unless you have cons on your 5 stars or an extremely good second half to make up for it. So before we talk about Nilo Bloom, there are other Bloom teams that you can do. There's the Fridge team. The objective of the team is basically to use Cryo and Dendro together for Hydro to consume less element. to basically act like you have more Dendro application than you actually do. This idea is made completely irrelevant by Nahida's strong 1.5 units of application every 2.5 seconds. But the other advantage it brings is freeze, which is honestly kinda nice, since the initial Bloom AoE is pretty bad, so it guarantees all enemies getting hit by all blooms. Obviously they need to self-group for that to happen. There was actually one unit that had aggressive AoE Hydro application at some point that the damage could rival Nilo Bloom, and the fridge mechanic actually met it, that unit being pre-nerf Barbara. Due to a coding error, Barbara would acknowledge Bloom cores as their own entities, which led to her ring pulsating more often, which created a ton of blooms in return. But they quickly patched this nerf, sadly. To be fair, it would have been one of the few glitches that would be relevant in endgame, but it's still disappointing since it was basically the only thing going for Barbara and Bloom teams. And the fact that she is a healer, I guess. I haven't talked about the units in particular other than Kave and Barbara, but that's just because I think the archetype faces more of a content issue than the synergy between units issue. So on to Nilo Bloom. Nilo Bloom removes most of Bloom's issues, that being needing to wait for the cores to explode by themselves, mid AoE and pretty low damage. Her passive is also one of the only instances of reaction damage percent actually being used as a good stat. So what's my opinion on Nilo? It's honestly rather high considering how current CCs talk about her, but I do not think that she is particularly great at the moment. However, she is still one of the better ways to deal with AoE content. The biggest issue I see are just, first of all, Mavrika and some of the other Natlan carries have such good quality of life as well as great AoE, and honestly are just better in AoE than Nilo. And Nilo would be directly competing with them in terms of ease of use. You would just rather go Mavrika or Varessa or any of the other great AoE carries. And Mavrika is obviously also the best single target damage dealer at the moment. So yeah, in that regard it's kinda cooked. And then the other big problem is just them not giving us enough AoE content. This is especially bad with the addition of Stinchel and Onslaught because it's a bossing mode entirely. Yes, there's one singular Nilo Bloom run uploaded by B, but no one else is playing Nilo Bloom, let's be honest. But Nilo still has her usual upsides of being relatively cheap to build and very flexible in the Dendro or Hydro units she wants to use. Certain Abyss checks like Cryo Shields and Geo Shields can just sadly soft lock her from clearing though. Or you're just forced to play Kave, which is unfortunate. Pick your poison. Then there's the upside of vertical investment. Nilo really likes Farina vertical as well as Yalan vertical, who are both flexible characters whose vertical is extremely useful in other teams too. Nilo herself has a great weapon and a great C2, with the C2 basically enabling the playstyle of your Hydro units as well as Bloom cores dealing a ton of damage simultaneously. If we look at no vertical investment, we have a big issue though, which is, in my opinion, Corley is holding the team back. Yes, she has her flexible Dendro application and her rotational flexibility, but I feel like a dedicated 5-star Dendro off-field damage dealer would be great. Perhaps a unit that scales on HP as well, so it doesn't feel bad because the team isn't even getting any attack buffs. There's also the CN speedrunning low-cost versions with Xingqiu and Yao Yao. And again, I don't think Yao Yao is doing much here except applying Dendro and healing. Xingqiu admittedly is also only there because he applies so much Hydro, but that's the thing, it translates to direct damage, so in my opinion it's very justified. Nahida also has her own issues in that team. It's not perfect synergy. She has the issues of multi-wave, although not a big deal since Nilo teams usually have great rotational flexibility, as well as her EM buff being useless most of the time, because the unit who's triggering the Bloom reactions is usually off-field, so then just applying Dendro, to be fair, she has her freaking 1.5 units of Dendro application, it's extremely valuable in that team because it guarantees a Dendro aura very easily. But yeah, that's it. She only applies Dendro. Her damage is very poor. I guess we should talk about Alhaitham and Nilo teams as well, and in my opinion he's alright. His Dendro application is solid and his damage is fine with Signature or Wolf Fang. In speedruns he is used as a Nahida replacement, when the team allows for him to be on field consistently, and Nahida's multi-wave issues would be too apparent. Although at C2 you should always use her instead. And as a second Dendro, he is just worse than Cole. Overall conclusion, Nilou Bloom is honestly a fine team, but just isn't used anymore because the current content pushed it to irrelevancy. When there are some actual Nilou Abysses again, she is going to be talked about though as one of the better teams. For example, that one 5.4 Mizuki Abyss, where she was unironically a good option. So let's talk about Burgeon next. This will be a rather short section since there's not actually much to say. Burgeon teams are bloom teams that use a pyro unit to make the blooms explode, to then deal AoE damage and do a bit of ripple damage to the on-field character as well. These teams are just Nilou teams without a Dendro Hydro restriction, but also just worse damage-wise. In the teams you usually go for Hydro, Dendro, Pyro as a baseline. That doesn't leave much room for anything else. You can still put an Electro unit in there to make some sort of reaction salad. There's no unit doing crit focus damage or talent focus damage in that team. So you are purely relying on transformative reactions to carry you. So the usual argument, it's better at low investment, is there, I guess, but otherwise these teams aren't particularly good. I wouldn't call them good. You can put another Hydro unit in there to get more Burgeons if you are using Nahida, which you probably should, but then without a defensive unit to help you, you run into survivability issues very quickly. A second Hydro also has the massive upside of dealing actual respectable Hydro sub DPS, Yelan for example, so that the team isn't actually completely dogged in single target. A second Dendro doesn't actually do that much. It helps with burning uptime, which no one cares about other than Kinnick and Amity. And yeah, that's basically it. There are some other more funny cope teams that you can do, and since we are only focusing on the fine-ish teams, we are ignoring those. I think Thoma is actually a pretty good Burgeon trigger, and my hot take is that Thoma actually does more than Kuki. His shields are kinda good even if you build him for full EM, and he has a very tiny normal charge plunge attack bonus on his C6. If you're playing Ayato Burgeon or something, yeah, it's fine. But yeah, anyway, even with all these upsides, Thoma isn't a game-breaking character or anything, and there's a ton of room for a dedicated Burgeon trigger. I suppose you can also play Kinnick in Burgeon teams, but as I said in the previous video, playing Burning is just a nerf to his personal damage, and the trade-off isn't worth it. So yeah, conclusion is same as Nilou. The content just doesn't favor it, and there's no situations in which Burgeon is actually better than Nilou, so it's not really worth talking about. Onto the main part, Hyperbloom. I already know I'm going to get cancelled over this because people defend this reaction like it's their waifu or something. So Hyperbloom works the exact way as Burgeon, except it's single target but doesn't do self damage. Now we actually need to talk about the damage that Hyperbloom and Burgeon does, I suppose. In Burgeon's case it doesn't really matter that much because you have the upside of AoE to carry you in AoE floors with a lot of squishy enemies. Hyperbloom, however, is supposed to be competitive with actual good carries in single target according to a decent amount of Genshin related content creators. Actually, it's kind of just CJF now, but yeah. So purely looking at its damage, with a trigger like Kuki or Raiden, we're looking at around 235k damage procs against an enemy with an initial resistance of 10%, which is decently common but doesn't really necessarily have to be the case. With Kuki, let's say you max out the amount of seeds you can trigger with her. That's 2 seeds every 1.5 seconds. Over a 21-second rotation, it's a total of 28 procs of Hyperbloom. 35 times 28 can be rounded to around 1000, so effectively 1,000,000 DPR. We are also ignoring that seeds can land in different positions, so sometimes you might get less than it says in the sheets. Sometimes the enemy teleports away, so you miss on a few seeds as well, yada yada. 1,000,000 DPR over 21 seconds is around 48k DPS. Now let me hold your hands when I say this. Sacrificing your entire team for that amount of damage is not worth it considering the current state of the game. If you're playing Xingqiu Yelan to maximize Bloom cores, yes, you do get double Hydro and 3 elements for Yelan's HP passive, but that's literally it. You can on-field Yelan, but that also kinda leads to a decent amount less blooms generated. Even GC Sim thinks double Hydro Hyperbloom is awful, and they usually shill low investment stuff. I can tell you right now, it is more efficient to build the team around Yelan than it is to build around the Hyperblooms, if you have a Yelan and want to have a use case for her in the team. Yes, when Nahida is your only 5-star on the account, Hyperbloom might be your best team, but that's such a niche scenario, and even then, I'm sure highly invested Sethos Aggravate can outdo Hyperbloom as well as certain Chevreuse variants, and that boy jamming, of course. Yes, Hyperbloom can carry your damage pretty far into the end game, but as soon as we are talking about floor 11 and floor 12, you are much better off dropping the team and investing into another archetype. Also, I haven't said it yet, but Hyperbloom is entirely single target in terms of damage, so it falls off in non-bossing content, which is funny because floor 11 actually did have a lot of AoE recently. Not to mention it is completely locked to Nahida. You can't tell me any of the non-Nahida Hyperbloom variants are good. Nahida just helps way too much with core generation for that not to be the case. That's pure Hyperbloom out of the way. Now let's talk about the better way to utilize Hyperbloom, which is Quickbloom. Quickbloom unironically has a pretty good concept. You use lower hydro application to still get a decent amount of seeds, but keep the quicken aura up as much as possible. Solo Xingqiu eats too much of the aura to be good at high investment. Furina, however, fits perfectly in the slot. Well, not really actually. Cookie's healing is sadly pretty garbage. You need Prototype Amber on Nahida, which sadly even diminishes her damage further. And let's be real, even with Prototype Amber and Cookie's healing, it does not feel great with C0 Furina. You really want that C1 and probably C2 as well. Then you also pull Nahida C2 to make Alhaitham's damage less mid, and congrats, you got a 12 cost team that's basically mid. Because none of the constellations actually help the damage out drastically, they just fixed the issues of the team that shouldn't have been there in the first place. I feel like Furina should have also buffed reaction damage percent for transformatives, seeing how she just creates natural anti-synergy with Taser and Hyperbloom and future Lunar Charge teams as well. But oh well, I guess I can talk more about the elephant in the room, which is Nahida C2. The Death Shred part is actually pretty nice. It should have been more, but it's fine. I'm kind of praying that the future Quicken support main function should be like Defense Shred, which would make the Defense Shred that Nahida C2 provides a lot better, because unlike other stats, Defense Shred just straight up gets better the more you have of it. Now, the Bloom part. On Shields it's a 30% strict increase to Bloom, Burgeon, Hyperbloom and Burning damage. In practice it's completely different. B, who speedruns Vanilla, told me that you kinda have to reset to get good Bloom RNG, which just sounds extremely painful. And in Double Hydro it's not even that insane of an increase, because you can't keep up the Quicken Aura properly, so your defense shred uptime is non-existent. So only like 40% of your team's damage is getting that 30% increase. And if you were innocent like me and thought, oh my god, Quickbloom can take advantage from both parts of the constellation, that's so great. That means Quickbloom is benefiting more from Nahida C2 compared to other teams, right? Then I should remind you that the first part only increases the non-reaction damage and the second part only increases the reaction damage. If you increase 50% of your team's damage by 20% and then increase the other half by 20% as well, you get a total increase of 20%. If you however played a team where 100% of the damage is non-reaction damage, then 20% damage increase to that 100% would also be 20%. And the other problem is the defense shred is quicken locked. You might think this isn't that big of a deal. The higher the cost for the Bloom team, the more damage is coming from talents. It's only good when you play units like Yao Yao or Xingqiu or something who don't really deal a lot of damage anyway. So yeah, as the constellation that's supposed to be the massive increase for all Quicken teams, Hyperbloom's teams, and any Dendro teams in general, I just don't buy it. The crit rate for the Bloom reactions should have just been 50%. The biggest problem with support constellations is that they will never be as good as carry constellations. Even though stuff like C1 Furina and C2 Shilonen are so strong, they will never be as good as getting your carries invested. We sadly don't have Triby's E1, that's just like the best Eidolon for almost every AoE character, and Nahida's should have been that way because there's no vertical in the entire game that increases transformatives damage directly without increasing anything else other than Mizuki C1, C6 and Nahida C2. And I guess Inefa's constellations if you want to count those. So we've gone over each archetype, let's try to fix this mess. A lot of it is just a damage issue, which has been apparent because they increase the ceiling of this game ever since 4.0 by an unholy amount. My fixes for the Quicken archetype are that Nahida should have more personal damage and her EM buff should be team-wide. Her mark should also be applied to all enemies in the field when her burst is active. Maybe they should also add a new Escoffier type unit that rewards you for playing Dendro and Electro only, or just not using Hydro. And maybe they could also shred defense. A direct buff for the additive reactions would also be nice, or a better off-field Electro for spread teams. My fixes for the burning archetype are just not really any fixes at all. It's a good archetype. Maybe a dedicated pyro burning carry so Emily isn't just good outside of one singular team. And then for the non-Nilo Bloom teams, Kawe's kit should be functional, hot take, and should also be very good in Freeze Bloom to make it a fun new playstyle that people can explore. And at the end it shouldn't be better than Nilo Bloom, but at least it should be viable. Then for the Nilo Bloom teams, a Collei replacement with someone that deals higher talent damage, maybe HP scaling, maybe a bit more front-loaded damage, and a direct blood buff similar to Mizuki C1. Nahida C2 should also apply to all enemies, not just quickened enemies. A better trigger maybe, someone with more utility. Please revert the Barbara buff as well. I feel like at this point it should just be reverted. And then Nilu's passive should probably be moved to skill for another passive, and C1 should also increase the actual damage that Bloom teams deal. I don't know why it doesn't. Then my fixes for the Burgeon archetype. They should also just add Burgeon units. No singular character cares about Burgeon other than Kinnick, who would rather play in burning teams. Maybe a better trigger would be nice. Next, the Hyperbloom, a team-wide healer with a lot of electro application and buffing. That's also a Hyperbloom trigger as well. I'm obviously not asking for all of these points to be fulfilled. A few of these things would already be so big for multiple archetypes. A lot of issues are also bottlenecked by Nahida being a very mid support, if we are being honest to ourselves. If they just do Luna Burgeon, Luna Hyperbloom, Luna Bloom, that would be extremely boring and offensive in my opinion. They just want to sell the units to fix the problems of these teams instead of fixing the units directly or the reactions directly. And I hope no one compares this video to those sloppy video essays why this archetype fundamentally failed and its horrible design. Dendro reactions are well designed. Nilo Hyperbloom and Burgeons are so fun in my opinion, and it's so easy to fix their issues. They've also just been neglecting Dendro teams ever since the end of 3.x, which was literally 2 years ago, if we don't count Emily and Kinnick, which we should count them because they don't add anything to those real 3.0 reaction based Dendro archetypes. But yeah, that's all I had to say for the Dendro archetypes as a whole. I really hope they revisit these archetypes in 6.x, but considering there are no leaked Dendro 5 stars, I'm a bit scared. Thank you all for watching as always. Like and subscribe if you enjoy my content, and then see you in the next one. Bye bye.